Hello everybody, thank you for joining me. Today is the anniversary of the death in 1989 of Samuel Beckett, whose plays were part of the movement known as the theatre of the absurd, because a number of playwrights of the time were writing plays which suggested that there was very little point in looking for any purpose in life. It was simply absurd. The play that he's best known for is Waiting for Godot, in which two tramps have conversations at a crossroads by a tree. Basically, we discover gradually that they are simply waiting for Godot, and very little actually happens in the play. One of them says to the other, "Well, that passed the time," to which the reply came, "Well, it would have passed in any case," which I think sums up the general sense of futility of life that was being presented here. And of course the play ends with Godot never having appeared. Of course, it's very tempting to, particularly because of the word used, to think of Godot, that Beckett is suggesting that this is God, but he denies that. He says that we shouldn't be reading anything into that name. It's not intended to represent God or anything else. What I think he's talking about is the process of waiting, and suggesting that waiting on its own is rather an absurd activity. Well, I want to counteract that view, because I think that waiting of itself is valuable, even if what you're waiting for is not likely to happen, as was in the case of Beckett's Two Tramps. The idea of waiting very much part of Advent, part of what Christians do as they wait for Christmas, wait for the arrival of Christ. And so, of course, for Christians there is a hope. And I think that's the thing about waiting. Robert Louis Stevenson said that it was better to travel hopefully than to arrive. And the Taoist statement is that the journey is the reward. And I think there's a lot of value in waiting, regardless of what you're waiting for, providing that you're waiting hopefully. There is nothing more likely to depress the spirit than waiting in a depressed sort of way, expecting nothing but the worst, just assuming that everything's going to be a disaster. But the opposite kind of waiting, which is optimistic, which is hopeful but not hopeful for anything in particular, just a sense that life is good and life will lead somewhere positive if we allow it to. That, I think, is the message of Christmas. It's an attitude, of course, that people can have quite legitimately, whether they're Christians or not. But I think for Christians, Christmas says that waiting, hoping, just believing in the future is something which is a genuine possibility, because the coming of Christ to the world does indicate that God is moving among us, that God is in charge, and that there are ways forward that will lead us creatively and positively into a good future. And so having an expectant, open, waiting sort of attitude to life, just believing that the best will happen and going on hoping that, I think is something that counteracts what Beckett was trying to suggest about waiting, but I think something which Christmas offers as a valid way of living.